Okay, so we're going to be doing things a little differently today. We'll still do names and pronouns, of course, but I listened to the audiobook version of this book this month, and it's inspired me with all of these Southern accents. So I'm going to challenge you all to say your name and pronouns in a Southern accent as our icebreaker. And of course, I will go first. So my name is Jonathan. My pronouns are him. Uh, and who wants to go next?
I'll go.
I
Um,
go.
my name is Sierra Garland, and my pronouns are she, her.
This is Benita. My name is Benita Benford, and I am originally from Kentucky, so I am very aware of the Southern accent. And my pronouns are she, her.
Hello, everybody. This is going to be real easy for me because I'm from Missouri. So my name is Grace Baumel. My pronouns are they, them. And yeah, so I can do a pretty good accent from Missouri for sure because that's where I grew up.
Hey y'all, my name is Saul. I cannot do any type of accent. My pronouns are he, him, and yeah, thanks.
I cannot do accents for the life of me, but um, hey y'all, my name is Arian, and um, I go by any pronouns. Yeah.
Nice. I know we have some native Southerners in here, so hopefully that wasn't offensive to you guys, but that was funny to listen to. Okay, so I will start us off by asking, what did everyone think of this month's book, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby?
I'll go first. What would I say about Razorblade Tears? Um, I would say my first perspective was I didn't like the nature of the dad's relationships. I didn't like necessary how they treated them. You can see, I guess, throughout the course of the book, just the way that they spoke to them, the way that they kind of treated them. At one point, the mom, Christine, she just, up and just left them only because of the simple choice of who they chose to love. Um, and that was the disheartening part for me. I think throughout the book, I feel like now when you come to life, I feel like we all have our own journeys, and I feel like Ike and Buddy, I feel like their journeys were completely different, but I feel like at some sort, to me, it panned out for what I felt like was justice for them. I feel like in their right, in the way that they chose to handle situations. But yet and still, I do feel like there were other ways to address the situation. It could have been an abundance of different ways to deal with it. But I feel like they were just so angry, and they were very angry at, their children because of who they chose to love throughout the course of the book, and just how other people treated them, just genuinely, just how before you get into anything else, just people choosing to love one another, just not because of what the choices you choose to make in life or who you choose to love. I feel like just overall there was not enough love. There was not a lot of guidance. They just really left the young men to soar for themselves, and luckily for them, they made good choices for them lives. You see more of their lives, in, I guess, the people that they connected with throughout the course of the book. So you could see them, they build, other relationships outside of what their parents, because if their parents had to speak about them, I don't think they would have had anything nice to say about them. So luckily for them, they had, stepped off and chose to make other decisions for them live, marrying, having a child, and, did good at work, had good friendships and things like that, who still cared for them, far past their living, excuse me. So ultimately, I did like in the end that they did, I guess, change themselves. But for a person like me, I can't say how I would feel if that was my dad. I can't say, how I would feel. Now maybe if I was in heaven, maybe I would, you know, be a little bit more forgiving, but I will be thinking about the things of how you treated me throughout the course of my life. Does it really matter that you're going through hell and hot water to really, avenge my death and try to find the killer? Does that even really matter at this point? When you were not there for me, when you could have, when it really did matter. So does it really matter that you're going to go hunt down these people, kill them, twist their tongues off, and whatever all the other things that they done throughout the course of the movie? The book. Was that really, worth it ultimately? Because still in the end, there still was no relationship, there still was no bond. And even with all that to say, I did drop a little tear for Buddy at the end when he passed. Because I did like at the end that they did acknowledge, where they had went wrong, where they could have been better, how they would move forward, and trying to, I guess, move better with their granddaughter. So I did like the likes of that, but I definitely was sad that, Buddy passed away. I did cry, but I still kind of, felt like, I wish things could have been a little bit different. I wish that it could have been a little bit more love ultimately. And in the end, that's my perspective. I hope that was, good.
Yeah, I'll go next. And yeah, I definitely agree. Like I really like the book. I've read I'm a mystery person, so I think like I definitely knew who it was probably maybe 100 pages in. I was like, I feel like I know where this is going. But I really enjoyed the journey getting to the end. And yeah, I felt the same way. I was just like, I think it was just a story about how, the dads were trying to make themselves feel better for the lack of accountability they had when their sons were alive. And I really liked when they talked about how they had more time. Like, oh, I thought I had more time to make things right, and I just yeah, so overall I really liked it. It was a little predictable for me, but it was really fun. Because I feel like in a lot of books that I read, the protagonists usually don't get violent or nothing violent ever happens. They just allude to it or they do something and they're like, "Don't do it. You're better than this." And like the dads weren't better than that. And so I think that's what made the story fun because you had no idea what they were capable of and it just kept moving forward. So, yeah, I thought that was very interesting. So I liked it.
I can go next. I also like the book, and Sierra, your slip up of movie. Like I also felt like the book was a movie as I was reading it, particularly the action parts. I really liked those parts. Um, I think for me, I really liked the fact that the fathers were not taking the high road. I feel like oftentimes people who are oppressed or disfranchised are made to not to like take the higher road and not get violent and not do all these things. And so there was like a certain satisfaction of the fact that they were actually getting revenge for the murders of their sons that I really liked. Um, that I was like rooting for them to like find every single person that was part of that of that murder. And the more also that we got to meet or like learn about the people that were like involved, the more I wanted them to die. Like the leader of the bike gang and the stepdad, like the more that we learned about them, I was like, oh, they definitely deserve to die. So I was very happy for that. Um, but one of the things that maybe not that like it wasn't my favorite, but I didn't quite like the author's writing style at some points. Like I like the action, I like a lot of that, but I found other parts like some of the dialogue I felt was a little forced. And there was some points in the book where like something would happen and like it would be described, but then like a couple of pages later it would be repeated again. And I was like, wait, what's didn't we just talk about this or like didn't this just happen? So I didn't like some of those parts, but overall, I really enjoyed the book. It was just more maybe like the dialogue or some of the non-action parts that I felt kind of dragged on.
I guess I'll go next. Uh, I agree with Saul. I mean, coming off of Mongrel, our last month's book, I had to get used to the book's like tone and yeah, just the way the author phrased things. Uh, I liked how they didn't take the high road either. Like it made sense with everything in the end because like how hyper masculine both the characters were. And I like how they grew and reflected throughout the book, but they were still very aware that they, weren't the most progressive and that they still had a lot of progress to do. And maybe that they wouldn't accept some things in the end. The way that Buddy Lee had so much death flags, but his death still moved me to a point. I wouldn't say like it was the most moving thing ever, but there were some motions going on. Uh, Regarding the book being a mystery, I think this is my first or second, I don't know, I'll just say first introduction to mystery. I'm not sure if we've read mystery before. Have we? I can't remember. But yeah, it was nice. I don't even think I didn't even guess the villain. Like it was just um I was there for the ride. It was nice. And yeah, justice was served and I like that.
Well, I really enjoyed this book. I was pleasantly surprised, truthfully, as a avid fan of shows like Reacher and Will Trent, where basically, the protagonist always gets their person and everything kind of works out in the end. I was really glad that this is kind of how this worked out. And I agree with the comments about it kind of flowing like a movie because that's kind of how I saw it going through my mind was like a movie. I will say that I felt like that this book really did a great job of showing the complexities of us as humans because as a person who's kind of grown up with that very toxic um, sorry growing up with that and seeing that how they how some people don't even really question things. They just kind of go with the flow like everyone else is going. And I did find it from the very beginning at the funeral, well, even, especially when the funeral happened um, and how, he was like listening to the Reverend going on and on about, the sins and all that, and him getting really upset about that. And then when he got in the car and him and his wife were having the conversation, and she's like, "You've said worse things. You're mad, but you've said worse things." But it's like, well, my sons have been killed. My son is dead. And so that's that whole thing. And me and my parents, or I say me and my mom, have had this conversation constantly where we're always talking about how when funerals come around people really show you the depths of who they are as far as because we all kind of go through our different emotions and all of that, but it all of a sudden people who you hated their whole life, all of a sudden they die and you're throwing yourself on the coffin kind of thing. But yeah, I enjoyed the whole book, and I enjoyed going through the journey of seeing how they discovered um, who was all behind it and how, the characters that came into play. And I really did. I was very pleasantly surprised with this book and very happy. I actually called some of my friends. I was like, "You all have to read this book. It's so good." So yeah, it was. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much.
Nice. Well, I will say, like all of you guys, I really, really enjoyed this book. I had a pretty good idea that I was gonna like it after like I think it's like chapter 4 or 5. The author makes a John Wick reference, and I love John Wick. So anything that's like that similar kind of vibe, I'm gonna like. So like that. With that, I did like how fast paced the story was. I was a bit worried that we were going to spend way too much time building up these characters and the universe and all of that. But I was very happy that I think it's like, what, chapter 10 or so, that we get our first bit of action. And then from there, it's like nonstop, which I really appreciated. I find that action books tend to lose their steam in the middle. And while this one wasn't, I think, didn't have the best middle of the story, I do think it still found a way to be interesting throughout the whole book. Um, and like you all said, I really enjoyed watching these fathers seek revenge for their sons' murders, but also in doing so, they are kind of making up for being such poor fathers. I liked that. Uh, like Arian said, I also have a little bit of complaints. One of my main things is the dialogue to me is so strange at times. And as I was reading the characters' dialogues, it became so apparent to me that I haven't read a book written by a heterosexual person, but especially a heterosexual man in a long time, because I'm really not used to some of the way these characters talk about women and sex. I was like, oh, okay. There's actually one line that I had to write it down because when I read it, I was like, what the hell? When Buddy Lee says his throat was tight like a virgin's pussy, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Only a straight guy could write that kind of line. um, and yeah, like Aaron brought up, in comparison to last month's book, I have to say, while that book is not, I don't think, classified or categorized as a mystery, it had a much stronger mystery element. In this book, not to sound like a smarty pants or a know it all, but I figured it out pretty early on. And once I did, I kind of lost the motivation to read because I knew what was going to happen next. And in the end, of course, I was totally right. But yeah, overall, I liked it. Yeah, very happy to have read it. Okay, now before we talk about our characters and the story, I do want to talk about the fact that we all know the author himself is not a queer man. Or for those of you who were not here last month, I told the folks who were that the author is not queer himself. I'm curious, in knowing that, how do you think this book handles queerness and homophobia? And of course, how do you think it handles the trans experience and transphobia?
To me, I think that a lot of these like topics were just covered at a surface level and it wasn't dove too deep, even though like the story is about the fathers contending with their sons being gay. I thought that it still didn't have the most development that it could have. And I found some spots to like, I don't know, I guess this is like one particular scene that I was like the dialogue within it was like almost cringy. It was when Maya, um, after Tangerine was shot and Maya took care of her, and she was like, "Well, we have to find an ally to take care of her," and that whole like explaining what that was, um, and like having then later, I think Body Lee and maybe even Ike used the word. I was like, I don't know if people are really using this word anyways, like in an everyday conversation. And if somebody who just learned the word and was like in their situation would as well. So like things like that. I wasn't here for last meeting, so I didn't know that the author was straight, but now like it makes sense. So like a lot of these things that I was like, oh, okay, well like I just didn't necessarily need to be there. I just kind of felt like that. So I do like the relationship that was explored and how both of the dads really contended with their treatment of their sons because they were gay. So I did like that, seeing that growth, and I do wish that there could have been more of it. But I did think that it stayed pretty surface level.
I guess I'll go next. For me, I feel like it was not the best job in regards to shedding light or explaining homosexuality in regards to me. I think that you definitely can tell that the author was a straight man, just based on the treatment of the characters, like just the things that they said about them, like the barbershop conversations, um, just overall how they treated them, just almost like I don't almost like they not almost like they're not human simply because of who they chose to love. Just the things that I feel like you would never say this about, a heterosexual person. You would never say these things just out of just moral respect, I would say. So some of the things I felt like there was no education, in regards to, gay, or lesbian or transgender relationships. To me, it just shows why young men in particular have are very scared or just not comfortable with their sexuality to even be who they are. That's why we have so many people who just are not comfortable with sharing some of those things. And when they are, it's certain things that happen because simply who they're choosing to love. So I do feel like you could definitely tell it was a straight man, writing the book. In regards to Tangerine, I did like how they kind of, showed the fall, I guess the journey with their relationship in regards to her, eventually having the job, and working there and them having some sort of relationship. Because at one point they didn't want to be around her, almost like she's not a human being. So to me, I feel like I did like that part. They, were able to be open enough to be around her and talk to her, and associate themselves with her. And in regards to like, allies and things like that, people are not that, gentle when they're speaking about heterosexual gay people and just the gay community. They're just definitely not. They're not like, hey, let me go find an ally for you. Like, I'm sure the language would be a little bit more worse just based off the context of the book. Now maybe they were trying to make it a little better as if they were trying to be gentle towards her, and I feel like were you only being treating her relationship? No, absolutely not. You would not have been open enough to give, care about, her at all. So I feel like the nature of their relationship only came about because something was needed from her. So it was not genuinely like they became friends at work or anything like that. It was because they needed something for her. And then luckily for her, she panned out to be a nice person. So that's how I perceive the relationships in regard to them. But no, I could definitely tell that it was a straight man writing the book. And I feel like this is why it's so many closeted, gay men in particular who just don't want to come out and be, walking their truth because of the treatment. Like, why do I have to sit in a barbershop and hear you just speak like that, about me because I love a guy or I love a woman? Like, that's not right to me. So I don't feel like it definitely was, well, maybe it was on point as to how guys treat, other gay men. So that was my perspective on it.
Well, I will say that I guess how I looked at it was that truthfully, as we all kind of spoken, that these fathers never would have even looked at themselves, so to speak, had their sons not been killed, right? They were kind of okay with just being like, all right, we don't really have anything to do with each other. Yes, I know you're gay and you have a granddaughter I probably would never really get to interact with. But the fact that they not only were murdered, but they were brutally murdered. And this action happens. And so then there's, okay, we want to find out what's happening and what's going on. And even how Buddy Lee got Ike to really join him, right? Was he desecrated Derek's gravesite. And so he knew, right? It was like he took that to know that that would get him to take action. And being, I've been in plenty of barbershops, taking my nephews to go get haircuts and stuff, and hearing the toxic masculinity and the things that they say, and not even um, that it. And I mean, like I said, I think you all are making great points, but I felt like with the book and how it was written, I think it was written in the sense that these were men who really weren't highly educated, who had not really had to, they never really interacted with the queer community until their sons came saying, yeah, I'm a gay man and I want to marry this man. And so in that light, as I think there was one part in the book where uh, Buddy talked about he found his son, and I hate that I forgot his name, the son's name, but he found him down by the creek or the lake or something. He was kissing a guy, and he basically, was trying to beat it out of him, so to speak. So in many ways, I just kind of took it in as a person who is um, dealing with a lot of that myself. I am definitely a person who's even questioned a lot of things about my own sexuality, but I already know the main people, my family would be the last people I probably would have that conversation with. And because of the things that I've heard and all of that. So I like I said, I think you guys make great points, but I just kind of went with it because I guess, for my own life experiences, I've just seen plenty of that. And so it was just kind of like, okay, this is what are people who are ignorant and have not had a reason to change or look at themselves or question their ignorance because the world around them has basically been just, been what they've always known. So I seen the journey that it took, and I really did like that Tangerine was transgender because here's this other level. It's not just, gay men, lesbian women. Now it's this other level of transgender. And so, like I said, just I think for me and my own, just from my own life experiences, I just kind of went with the flow of it. And so, like I said, I think you guys bring up good points, but for me, it was just kind of like, I just like, yep, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they say. But the fact that I had actually kind of confronted the young man who was saying that, knowing full well he never would have said any of that, probably most likely had his son still been living. But because of the circumstances, then they, as things happen, do go about when something happens in your life. If you're any type of person who has any type of feelings, the first thing you do is kind of have an introspection of what does this mean for me, or what could I have done different, or of all of that. So.
Yeah, I really agree with what everyone's saying. And I think you can tell that the author was definitely straight, but I feel like that might help a little bit because the author is writing a perspective of these two, you know, adult men who have never had any of these experiences and never been exposed to any of this. And just growing up um, in Missouri and some of the places that I have, like I've never been exposed to barbershops per se, but some of the things that growing up, like my um, people I would socialize with, like the normalcy of homophobia and just being pretty vitriolic, especially when it's just like men in the room. It's like keeping each other in check because like what's the worst thing that you can be, right, is gay. And so, and just the heteronormativity of all of that. And it's, not right, but and I think that might have kind of helped a little bit with like the story because it kind of showed their progress and the things that they were dealing with, like maybe, like their strong feelings towards the community, why they acted the way that they did. And for some reason, death, I forgot who mentioned, but like at a funeral, they despise people, and at the funeral they was like, oh, it's the best person in the whole wide world and we love them and I miss them, and we just know that that's not the case. But whenever something traumatic sometimes has to happen to shake people out of their foundation, which is unfortunate that it takes that. And I feel like with these two, the dads, you know, um, yeah, like with the dads, it just kind of felt like that is their lived experience, and that it actually took an act of violence to get them to realize how their life was progressing. And so I almost wonder if like the author was a little bit more basic because the fathers only had a basic understanding just based on the conversations that they would have with their sons. And I would really like a follow-up on, whenever they hired, Tangerine. I'm sure Tangerine will talk about her experience and how much it's going to open them up to be more accepting and better, and maybe say something that they wouldn't have said before. So I'm wondering how much of it is actually the author being straight, but also the author being straight in straight spaces with predominantly men and hearing a lot of the same verbiage. So I read the book, but I also listened to it at the same time. And I think the listening experience was a lot more fun than the reading experience, but probably because of the accents, and just kind of being more in it. I was very engrossed, and it did feel like a movie. And I think it could have had more depth, in terms of like LGBTQ plus and like, different words and like ally and all that, but also from the perspective of the dads, that would have all been like very surface level and new as well. And so yeah, that's just kind of what it made me think of, was just more a perspective coming from the dads. But I think it could have had more depth to it as well, maybe more in-depth conversations, like especially at the gay bar, maybe with the people that were there and their kind of experiences. So I think they tried to do that with like the bartender, but it did feel a little bit more surface level than a deep knowing that you would get maybe with a queer author.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I was a bit surprised how the author chose to write a book that centers two queer characters and two homophobic fathers. Yet it seems like we don't really discuss queerness and how to combat the homophobia that you're conditioned in enough. Everything to me, like I believe a few of you said, felt so surface level. And I was also surprised how we don't really talk about Derek and Isaiah that much. Um, I got to be honest, like for the middle part of the story until like the end, I kind of forgot about them because we're not talking about them at all. Um, Not that I'm saying this story needs to be like Don't Cry for Me, where you have this homophobic father who is like lamenting on his relationship with his son. Obviously, Buddy Lee and Ike don't have the time to cry throughout this whole story with all the killing they're doing. But at the same time, there really was there wasn't enough time for reflection with these fathers. And that really surprised me. Also, I was a bit surprised by some of the language that the author chose to use. I mean, not that I'm saying I want a book that is filled with transphobic and homophobic slurs. Obviously, I don't want that. But at the same time, if we're trying to convey to readers that these are two men who are still struggling with accepting queerness, more so their son's queerness, the language is almost a little bit too clean on their end. But I don't know. Perhaps since the author is straight, he didn't want to come off as homophobic, which I can understand. But at the same time, for storytelling purposes, I do think that it would have been useful. Also, I was surprised that since Buddy Lee and Ike both expressed attraction towards Tangerine before knowing she was trans, I was surprised that we don't discuss how their discovery of her being trans made them feel. I thought that would have been a really cool time to explore how it feels to have an attraction to a trans woman as a man who, as far as they know, has never had that attraction prior to meeting Tangerine. But, you know, whatever. I will say though, I did like, it was brief, but how the author kept lamenting the fact that just because Tangerine is a trans woman and has attractions to men, that does not make her gay. I do think it is incredibly important that when we discuss transness and sexuality, we understand that your gender, your sex, and your sexuality can all be very different. So I will give the author props on that, although it is brief. He says it more than once. So props to him for doing that. Okay, since we discussed the homophobia, we have to talk about the racism. I'm curious, how did you guys think the author, I say, how do you think the book handles race and racism throughout the story?
I feel like, to me, I enjoyed that part. And the reason why I feel like sometimes there's a disconnect when you talk about race, because sometimes we don't take the time to have those conversations, the really hard conversations, the ones that where you really have to understand why a person conducts themselves in the manner in which they do. But, some of the stuff was, they were raised this way. So these were just behaviors that they've learned. So I did like the hard conversations, because to me, sometimes, people sit, and even for myself, sometimes, I would like to ask certain questions, but I would have to be in a comfortable space because I wouldn't want to offend anyone. But of course, that's a very, very, very hard topic to have when you're talking about race. So to me, I do like how they were able to have those hard conversations and find an understanding and a respect for one another. And then ultimately they end up finding, I felt like, a love for one another. So I did enjoy that part with race, because sometimes I'm like, why don't people just say it? Why don't you just ask the question? Ask it. But I also understand that some people, are not open. Some people are not, able to receive things. And of course, if you're racist, are you even going to sit down and put yourself in a situation to have those conversations? But I feel like they were forced into that situation to kind of have that conversation, which at the end, to me, they were riding harder for each other than anybody else. They had each other's back ultimately, because sometimes it's not about race, it's about the relationships of how people treat one another. And of course, they didn't do the best with treating them sons, but I feel like I did like that, the race aspect of it, me personally.
Yeah, I would agree. And I really thought this is where the author was coming from a level of experience, right? So we can tell the author was straight, but the author is a Black man. And so I feel like that really came across the pages, and it was much easier for like that to be throughout the story a lot more. And I felt like that was more fleshed out because that was probably, like a lived experience. It is a lived experience from the author. And I think it was really necessary to the storytelling, because not only was this couple gay, they were also an interracial couple, right? Who had a child together. And I thought it was interesting that they didn't mention that they intentionally made the child interracial as well. That didn't really, it came up a little bit when they talked about it, but I just thought that was really interesting that that never really came up again. And I feel like it also helped us want every one of the bikers to die. So I feel like that was also a really helpful plot point, because that helped me. Like as soon as that biker guy started talking about anything, I was like, "Ugh, I can't wait. I can't wait." So so and yeah, and I think it was really good to kind of, I think the author tried to talk about intersectionality, like intersectional, like when it comes to racism and then homophobia, right? So I think the bartender scene was trying to kind of go there. I think it probably could have had more depth, but like the bartender was talking about, like MLK, and like we're not free until everyone's free, and or yeah, something along those lines, and that injustice for one is injustice for all. And so I think the author was trying to get that across, where maybe like the dad that was talking to the bartender would kind of understand that my struggles is actually the queer liberation struggle, which is all of our struggles, that until we have equity for everyone, like there's still going to be problems for everyone. So, and I feel like that was trying to come across, but it felt like, because the story was so fast paced and the author only had so much time to keep everyone's interest, that it didn't go quite where I was hoping it would. And I think it was a necessary part of the plot line, just because then you have, very different lived experiences between the fathers, but then they realized that they had a lot more in common, and that, the white father was like, oh, I wish I had your shoes. And that whole conversation, I think, was really important to the story to kind of help understand um that, the circles that the white dad was in. For some reason, I am losing everyone's names today, but that was in, was actually pretty racist, and realized that he couldn't bring, the other father into certain areas, and that yeah. And so I think that was just really important, especially for the location of the story as well, and the history that is there. So
And before I share, I do know, Saul, you have to leave us pretty soon. Before you do, I'm curious, is there anything you want to go over before you do leave, or can we just keep going?
No, we can still keep going. I don't know if all hear me well. I'm on my bike now. But yeah, there's nothing in particular that I wanted to talk about. But in the question that was just asked, I do think that race was a more central theme, or maybe like a more developed theme, just because that was something that both of the main characters could talk about between them from their own personal experience, right? That I could talk about how much harder he had to work as a Black man to, I guess, better his reputation once he was out of prison, and how Buddy Lee could just continue being who he was and still kind of get by in the world. Although I think, there's other things about Buddy Lee and who he is that just are central to who he is. But I do think that that was a better explored theme throughout the book. But I also, and again, maybe it's just I don't like the way that the author writes a lot, but I think that some of the things were just so explicit. Sorry, now there's a lot of cars. Some of the things were just super explicit. Like, for example, one of the times where I think Buddy Lee, when he was trying to stab Winthrop, and the cops showed up, and he like straight out like mentions how it's white privilege that he's not getting shot, and although that is correct, like I just thought like that specific mention that like it was explicitly said in the book, I found like wasn't my favorite way. Like it just when like maybe as a reader when I'm just fed that, I don't like that as much. I did like some of the times where when it was more of a conversation between Buddy Lee and Ike, and Ike was telling him about his experience and the ways that things are different for him because he is a Black man. I did enjoy those parts and I found them insightful, but some of those like more explicit of like, oh yeah, Buddy Lee in his mind is like, oh, thank God for white privilege. This is like why I'm not getting shot. I'm just was like, oh, okay, well, like that was one way to write that into the book.
Okay, I have to disagree with you guys. I think very similar to the conversations about homophobia and transphobia, I think the conversations in this book about race felt very surface level and oftentimes felt quite forced. There's the conversation between Buddy Lee and Ike when they're in Ike's car, I believe. And Ike is going over the different experiences, I would say the different ways that their lives are different based on the way people view them as a racial class. Um, with police, with living in certain neighborhoods, with driving certain cars, all of that felt very like, why are we talking about this as we're on the way to go kill someone? That's kind of what I mean by forced. And Grace, I know you mentioned intersectionality. I have to also disagree. I think this book did not discuss intersectionality enough. Going with your example, Grace, the bartender in the bar, prime example, he quotes MLK about freedom and liberty, justice for all, blah, 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 but he doesn't understand that Martin Luther King Jr. hated gay people. So maybe don't use that example. I don't know. Like, I understand there's homophobia and racism, but we have to also talk about like how these two things oftentimes clash with one another. You may go into a space that welcomes people of color but hates queer people, and then vice versa. And I feel like the author really didn't delve into that enough. That's probably because he's straight and obviously doesn't have the lived experience, but I don't know. I feel like if you're going to write a book about homophobia and queerness, you got to do a better job at explaining uh, how these two things make someone's life more difficult. But whatever. Um, okay, let's talk about our three main characters. General thoughts: Ike, Buddy Lee, and Tangerine. Let's start with Ike. General thoughts on Ike as a character in this story.
I thought that Ike was a bit more one-dimensional, and I know that there's growth of all the characters, but like in comparison, and maybe this is, I mean, I guess could be nuanced as well, but it seemed to me that Buddy Lee was more open and like more willing to accept both Derek and just like the situation, so that he like just felt more accepting, even though he was still very homophobic and also racist himself. So that was definitely like different to me, that I just felt like Ike was a little bit more one-dimensional than maybe in comparison to Buddy Lee.
For me, Ike, hmm, I would say Mr. Ike. Um, okay, so his journey in prison, I guess I feel like is where they really introduced him in regards to, I guess, his prison life and what he had, been through in regards to that, which kind of moods I feel like shapes his character and kind of what he's been through. Um, I did like he got out, did it, served his time in prison, and then he came out and he, made a life for himself in regards to establishing his lawn business and, things of that nature. Um, I just wish he was just, I would just say, I just wish that he was just a little bit loving now for him. I feel like that is where probably I would say the breakup began, I would say, because he was, I believe, in prison for like 15 years. And in the meantime, his son was, I guess, left to be raised by his mom and things of that nature. So I feel like he missed a significant amount of time, which, I guess led to the gap in their relationship. But I feel like hopefully he will grow to be an amazing grandfather, is what I feel like about Mr. Ike there. That's my perspective, I would say.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with you, that I was kind of hoping it, because he definitely didn't really seem like he had or even wanted to really have interaction with his granddaughter. And so at the end, when he was, kind of talking about how she was growing and her and Tangerine's relationship, that I was like, okay, hopefully that this is moving in the right direction. I kind of, for me, like I said, he just seem like other men I've known or know. So I can't say that I really didn't think too much about it because I was interesting using was that he was one dimensional because like I said, I think because I know men like him, I really didn't see that, but I can understand where that would come off. And even the conversations, with him and Buddy Lee, I know that we discussed that about, the race. I think, again, because many of us probably wouldn't, I don't know, in the situation, because I think it was you, somebody I apologize. Someone had mentioned felt like those conversations were kind of forced, but at the same time, I was like, well, when would those conversations even happen? Because these two men would never really interact with each other except in this instance because this is what they're doing. But yeah, that was kind of like I didn't, as far as Ike, he just for me, he was like someone I knew. So
Yeah, I don't know, I liked Ike um a lot. And I think Jonathan, was it you on Discord where it reminded us of, like the show Dexter and that cop that Dexter had to deal with all the time? Yeah. That's immediately who I thought of as well for like Ike's character. And I feel like maybe yeah. Yeah. And I just feel like maybe Ike's character was a little bit more subdued because I know throughout the story he was talking about how he had to keep a part of himself really separate and not get violent because he had violent tendencies. And so maybe that's why there wasn't so much of a like he felt like everything was forced because he was trying to like hone in a part of himself um that was raised violent and was had very violent tendencies. And because I know Ike, I think, discussed he had murdered 10 people before the last one he got caught for, and he actually only took the rap for somebody else. So that's why he was in prison. And I was really hoping that we would get more depth whenever Ike was talking to Buddy Lee after the incident in the bar about why that made him so uncomfortable. And he kind of talked about him needing to deal with that, but I was really hoping that there would be it would I don't know. I was really hoping for more to come out and like in regards to intersectionality and stuff like that too. Again, I feel like a lot of things were just surface level because the story was too fast moving to really get the depth that you needed maybe to get to the point. I feel like you could have done it, but I also don't know. Sometimes I feel like when an author writes, they have an audience in mind. So I don't know if this was more for like a general straight audience to try to get them into a story where they might actually have to think about racism and actually think about homophobia for the first time in their life. So this might seem shallow here for our group, but might actually be like, wow, this is astounding for a certain other group of folks. Like, I don't know, but I did like Ike's character a lot. And I just really wish he could have opened up more. And the only time he really did open up, it was in a very violent way. So I don't know if that was intentional or not. Um, but then you can kind of see his soft side with his administrator of his business and maybe when to take care of like Tangerine at the end. So I don't know. I wanted to see more from Ike, and I wanted Ike to open up more, even in his head, to us as the omniscient reader, So
I agree with Grace with wanting more openness from Ike, I guess. Um his riot part of himself, I don't know, like whenever I read that, like, oh, I don't want Riot to come out. It felt very edgelordy to me, but it's yeah, like the icy red kind of thing. But I get it since you're behind the slammer for like 10 years, I think. This kind of thing happens. So, yeah, I feel like they could have delved into the guilt he had towards missing a lot of Isaiah's growing up. They did mention it, but I don't know if I was satisfied enough with how they, um, how much they touched upon it because that was like 10 years. And relating to that, I feel like him and his wife never really had a proper conversation of that. Like I'm trying to think of their interactions in the book, and I can't really think of uh a moment that they really had together. There was that time where when they were at the house and it was just like um they mentioned this kind of the way things were and how it's a bit better now. But like, yeah. Um, anyway, I think the author definitely had a vision of how Ike would start and how he would end, and how his growth would be. So I feel like he achieved that, or he achieved it in the way that he plotted it, I guess. Um, yeah, I thought Ike was okay as far as a main character goes. Um, and as far as a straight person's view into fruity or matters. I do want to say though, like at the bar scene where yeah, they mentioned his coconut-sized biceps, and then my shift of eyesight changed. I was like, wow, he's a stud muffin. Coconut-sized biceps? Are you kidding me? And I was like, whew. I had to fan myself a little bit. Kidding. But yeah, he was okay.
Yeah, like you guys are saying, I did like Ike. Um, like I mentioned on Discord, and like a few of you just mentioned, I do wish that from both fathers we got a lot more vulnerability. I feel like the author, because this book is an action novel, the author chose to focus primarily on the anger that can come with losing a child, especially losing a child in as brutal of a way as Ike and Buddy Lee did. But we're not really focusing on the more, I guess, softer or sadder side of that. And I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity. We get it towards the end, and of course, we will get there when we talk about the book's ending. But that for me is where the author's writing really shined, as Ike is crying over Derek and Isaiah's gravestone, and of course, Buddy Lee's too. Um, so yeah, I will also say that this critique also applies to Buddy Lee. I think that the author, I don't know if it's intentional or not, kind of made them a little stereotypical. Buddy Lee is kind of the angry, I'm sorry, Ike is kind of the angry black man throughout the novel, and I wasn't very happy about that. And then, of course, we're painting Buddy Lee, the white father, as this more understanding, kinder soul, while Ike is the angry black man. So wasn't happy about that, but I guess for the purpose of the story, it works. And yes, like Erin was saying, I, in my mind, Ike is very, very sexy. I was like, God, he must be like daddy. Oh my God. But yes. Okay. Buddy Lee, general thoughts on Buddy Lee.
Yeah. Personally, for me, Buddy Lee, I grew up with a lot of Buddy Lees. Just from where I was raised in Missouri and just yeah, I just knew a lot of Buddy Lee's. And so sometimes reading the book with Buddy Lee, I'm like, oh, Buddy. Like that's, a lot of times whenever he's just saying shit, and I was just like, Buddy. And I was kind of glad that Ike was there to be like, dude, you have no idea what you're talking about. Which is a breath of fresh air because it kind of made my childhood in my body kind of sing a little bit, finally having someone make a Buddy Lee accountable for some things finally in their life. And yeah, I agree with you, Jonathan, about the stereotypes a little bit in the book. I was kind of thinking that with especially like Buddy Lee. Um, yeah, like they, yeah, I don't know. I liked Buddy Lee because I feel like Buddy Lee was supposed to be there for comedic relief, I guess, sometimes, just with how much of a dope he was a lot of times. And so you did have that, like, not like 80s cop movie vibe, but it kind of was like that, but only on like a vengeful streak is sometimes how it felt. And um and how kind of conniving sometimes Buddy Lee was, especially with trying to get Ike involved, like doing that to like their son's gravestones and things like that. And yeah, it was interesting. I don't really have a lot to say about Buddy Lee. It's just I've known a lot of Buddy Lees in my life, and I feel like the author must have met a lot of Buddy Lees in his life too, because I was pretty spot on sometimes, just the description of the house and where he lived. And, I was like, oh, I know. I mean, it just transported me back to my childhood. So
I had to laugh, Grace, when you said the 80s cop movie because there was, especially that scene when they were in the car together, where I literally thought of Eddie Murphy and oh my goodness, I can't believe his name just went out of my head, but where Eddie Murphy he got him out of jail to help him find this other guy. And that picture went straight in my head when I was thinking about them, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is." So when you said that, I was like, "Yep, I saw that a few times." So, but yeah, I also would agree with you about Buddy Lee kind of being the comic relief in many ways because of the way he, some of the phrases he would say and things he would mention. So yeah, so I do agree with that, and I liked him as a character. Um, and like I said, listening to you all, I do believe, or I guess, yeah, going with what you guys are saying, I can totally agree with that. We didn't get the depth of a lot of depth with these characters and all the things that were going on, and I think a lot of it was because of this kind of, fast pace in like in my as I said at the beginning in my head it was going in my head like a movie. And so just like a movie, right? It's like sometimes you don't get the full you don't really get to delve into characters because they're trying to hurry up and get to the end in a way. So
Okay, guys, I like Buddy Lee. I like Buddy Lee because he was funny. He was funny. Like even when he got down, like to like I think when he first met Christine, they talk about their story a little bit about how she, I think he asked to dance with her, and she pretty much told him no. But then he went and got her some flowers, and then he came back and got down on like one knee and asked her to dance, and was just telling her how gorgeous she was. And then it's his sense of relief, in the awkwardest times, I felt like he would just throw a joke out there. So I did like him, and I did like his sense of um, maybe once he found out about his son, how when okay, if something were to happen like that, like if you could, take out your rage and really could act like that and really live to see the light of the day and not go to prison. Like, yeah, I imagine I would probably go over to that person's house and, just tear up all that stuff. So I did like that part of him. So I think I like Buddy Lee for sure. I was very sad when he died. I was so sad. I cried. I definitely listened to the book. I read the book and I listened to the book on audio. And then after I did it, I kind of, listened to it again and read along with it on the audio book. So that part of him, dying, it was very sad to me. Because I was like, no, not Buddy. So I like Buddy Lee. I know he was, he had his, discrepancies. He was definitely an alcoholic for sure. He was sick. I wish they would have kind of like, went in a little bit more on that and how he would care for himself a little bit more of that, but then I just died. So I guess there was no purpose in that. But I would have liked to, see, okay, when did he find that out? What happened? Like, how did you address that? Like, how did you just skip over that big part of your life? And we're just like, oh, he's coughing up blood. Like, and no one's like, hey, let's take him to urgent care. It was just like, so that part of him, and I don't know if that was because I grew a liking to him, like, wait, he's coughing up blood, take him to the hospital. So I did personally like Buddy Lee definitely at the end. I was sad about him, going on to, on to the next life.
Yeah, like you all
Uh,
said, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
okay. No, that's okay. I just wanted to say that I agree with Grace and pretty much everyone that he was definitely comic relief. I think the author was trying to make Ike, I mean Buddy Lee Ike's foil, but it wasn't really working that well since um yeah, I don't think they were fundamentally different enough in views for that to work. Um yeah, definitely comic relief. And I just wanted to add to Grace's thing about knowing a lot of Buddy Lee's. Yeah, I don't think he would have listened to Ike if he wasn't like a pure wall of muscle and that he needed him to work together. Um, and yeah, um, I get that circumstances have to change in order for viewpoints to change, but like if it was that easy, I wish it was that easy because like I end up sounding like the friend that's too woke. And yeah, a Buddy Lee's a character. Same growth trajectory as Ike, except he dies, which is sad. Yeah.
Yeah, to agree with all you guys, Buddy Lee was definitely the comic relief, and I think that's kind of what I guess endears you to liking him. You don't have much of a choice but to like him. And I like the fact that he's the kind of comic relief that isn't annoying. Like he does have times where he knows to be serious, which I appreciate. Uh, and like Grace said, it felt like an 80s like buddy cop comedy. These are both not 80s movies, but it did remind me a lot of like Rush Hour or National Security, if anyone's ever seen those two films. Um, so yeah, I liked Buddy Lee. Uh, yeah, I mean, we knew he was gonna die. Uh, I like knew pretty early on once he first mentions coughing up blood, I figured either he sacrifices himself during battle and dies for Ike, or he takes the rap for the whole thing and then goes to prison and of course dies in prison since he has such little time left to live. Um, so yeah, predictable, but I did like Buddy Lee. Okay, Tangerine. General thoughts on Tangerine in this novel?
Tangerine, I would say. I wish I could have seen a little bit more of her story, is the most I could say. As I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, what do I remember about Tangerine? Not that I don't remember her, like, but it's like, what do I really remember about her story? Like, for them to bring up that she's a transgender, I wish that I could have, learned a little bit more about her story, about her journey. Um, so I wish they would have made her for her to be, mentioned, for them to be looking and searching for her. It was like, okay, y'all found her, and then now what? So it was just like, I don't know. I wish I could have seen a little bit more of Tangerine's story, I would say.
Yeah.
Sorry, can't get myself off mute. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no,
My
you go.
apologies, Greg.
No, you go. I'm going.
I was just going to say, I agree with you in the sense of really, what was her story? I will say there were plenty of times when I was really kind of pissed with her. I was like, um, in the sense that these men, basically got involved, be, got involved in your mess and they were killed for it. And then you go run it off and saying you don't want to have it, you don't want to do this. You don't want to, tell this story anymore. But as far as, I can't say, I didn't dislike her, but I guess I just feel like I really didn't get to know her story or know about her. I felt bad about what happened with her mom, but at the same time, and again, because I was like, oh wow, that's a lot going on with that, but we didn't get to really uh, uh, get into it because again, trying to get to the action and all of that. So, like I said, I didn't dislike her, but she did kind of piss me off in some areas.
Yeah. I agree with everybody so far. And then I think the folks that know me know what I'm gonna say. You're telling me a female character wasn't fleshed out by a male author? I'm shocked. No, like, I'm shocked. I mean, like it happens so frequently where women are used as a plot device and not actually fully fleshed out in a story. And this has been my critique in a lot of different books that we've read, specifically from male authors. And I think it really happens very frequently. And I don't think it's intentional. I just think it just happens this way a lot. And, Tangerine was a huge, major plot device. And as soon as we meet her, it was like, she's transgender. Blah, 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 blah. She works for me now. Toodaloo. And, and that's just kind of how it felt because I would have loved to had her talk more. She was also used to like flesh out that, the guy's dad. So she was also used as bait. So it was just really interesting. And I, man, I just, ugh. She would have been such a good tie-in with everything that this book had to say if she was allowed to speak and, about her experiences with like men. And I think we've all had experiences with, straight men like using people or young people and then not wanting to be held accountable and they'd rather kill people than actually be held accountable for their actions because of power and money and things like that. And so I think Tangerine would have been a super dope character. And instead of just being a part of the plot that just kind of got dragged along with like Ike and Buddy and the whole thing. And I would have loved more, especially when they were driving in the car together. I feel like that could have been a good opportunity for some more depth there about what her life was like growing up in like that small of a town, being, trans, and then also having a mother that still dead names you, even though you 100% are exactly who you want to be. And I think that could have just been way more, way more. So I don't know if I like Tangerine or not necessarily because I don't feel like we got to know Tangerine at all, besides like a very brief glimpse. And even at the end, being like the admin for Ike, it's like what does that mean? Like, what does that mean for her? Like, how'd she deal with her mother's death and not being able to reconcile that her mother really never accepted her, and things like that. I would just liked a little bit more.
Okay, totes agree. Um, yeah, I could sympathize with Tangerine. Like, I don't know if they mentioned how old she was, but she seemed so young, like late teens, maybe early 20s. And yeah, I remember holding similar sentiments surrounding um love and how she might not find someone else, or how she held the only source of affection she had so dear. And that was what made it so annoying. Because like she had to wake up, see the truth, smell the roses. Like I was kind of irritated sometimes, but then like, yeah, the fear, I get it. Um, yeah, I totally agree with Grace. They could have added so much more. Um, they could have talked about her hardships in life and especially the dead named mother. She was so distraught over it, and I feel like they could have explored that, um, the disconnect of how she was still dead naming her, but she was so distraught, and I felt like that could have been like a way that Buddy Lee and Ike could have reflected more with Isaiah and Derek. Like that would have added like a much more closer perspective to that. Um, but yeah, um, she serves the plot well. Um, and yeah, good for her that life was looking up at the end.
Yeah, I agree with you all. I mean, I would have obviously loved to have Tangerine fleshed out a bit more. Um, like you all were saying, she feels very much just like a plot device. She's used for her first portion of the plot, then she gets shot. She's out of commission for like essentially the third act, and then she comes back around to lure the is he the mayor or the judge, whatever, his father out of the house. And then she again is not in the story. Then she comes back at the very end. So that was a bit annoying. Um, I will say that, like Erin was just mentioning, and I'm thinking about it more now, since Buddy Lee and Ike both had relationships with their sons where it seemed like they were, I wouldn't say no contact, but like essentially only reaching out for like major life events or like major changes to their lives. Um, and Tangerine, even though she has what I'm assuming to be a transphobic mother, or at least one who dead names her consistently, but she still chooses to be in her mother's life to some capacity. Perhaps they could have all bonded over their messed up relationships with their parents and with their children. Obviously, yes, Derek and Isaiah were not trans individuals, but they were still part of the queer community. So I think that could have been an opportunity for bonding between all three characters. I also would have loved it if Tangerine was like a bit of a badass. Like maybe she's like tagging along and like she's down to kill folks too because she's mad as hell that like the guy that she believes is in love with her is like sending guys to come kill her. But no. Uh, Also, it's come up a couple times in the stories we've read. It's primarily been men loving married men, but like I am so tired and bored of storylines that revolve around someone thinking that a married person is in love with them. I was like, come on, you gotta get over it, sis. Move on. And I was also a bit surprised with how patient Ike was willing to be with her when they first meet, and she's like refusing to give anything up. I'm not saying I want to see Tangerine like tied down and tortured, but like maybe break a finger or two, maybe pull out a molar, because she was really sitting on that secret and it was really pissing me off. But whatever. Okay. Um, I'm curious, what similarities or differences did you guys notice between Buddy Lee and Ike throughout the story? Outside of course, their racial differences.
I would say the similarities that I seen in Ike and Buddy Lee were that their backgrounds in regards to like them going to prison. Um, Also how they connected with their sons, in regards to how they treated their sons. I would think, in regards to they were similar in that. I think they became different in regards to where race played. I think that's when they became different. So that was my take on there, I guess, race and their, yeah, that's my take because I'm losing my train of thought. I'm sorry, guys.
It happens to all of us. I agree with you. Definitely they both experienced, jail time, prison. And there was one part I remember Buddy Lee saying he had how much meth he had, and Ike was like, "I'm sorry, you only got what was it, 5 years for that or something like that." He's like, "If that had been me or another brother, you've been buried under the jail." Um, I think also, it's they're just relationships with their son. They both having to, or they're both trying to, reconcile that. Oh, okay, my son's gone. He's been killed, and now I want to get mad as hell about it and do something about it. And I also think part of they both had um, a little bit of disappointment. I would even dare say hatred for themselves that they, allowed time and their, their hatred for their sons being gay um, to get in the way of having a good relationship with them. And as I said, we've mentioned how there's so many things and so many aspects of the book that you really don't get to that don't go into depth because I kept thinking about the grandbaby, and I know there was like a certain scene where Buddy and her got to have a little interaction, but now they're the caregivers for her. And, how are you going to handle that, this child who has grown up, who's come into a relation, into a family that is same sex, how's that all going to play out? So yeah, they definitely had a lot of similarities. But I think, of course, as we mentioned, quite a few differences as well.
Yeah, but yeah, I really agree with everything that you said, and that's kind of how I feel about their relationship. So I think, they were able to bond over their, you know, how they reacted to their children, going to prison, and um and just how those interactions meet and, their similar like regrets, and yeah, so I think everyone pretty much spoke on everything I was thinking.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add, aside from Ike being more rigid and solid, and Buddy Lee being more nonchalant and almost apathetic, uh, with how they decided to choose their, or how they decided to cope with everything life was throwing at them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I would say outside of the similarities of them both doing prison time and, of course, not accepting their son's queerness, I'm not sure how they're similar, but I do think they are vastly different from one another. I think it's interesting to see how when we first meet Buddy Lee, he is seemingly perhaps not accepting that his son was gay, but he at the very least is accepting or has accepted the fact that his son was married to Isaiah. Um, while when we first meet Ike, he's willing to defend uh, Isaiah and Derek from the pastor who gives the funeral service. But he doesn't even say my son was gay, I believe, until the very, very end of the book. He can't even say the words, while Buddy Lee is able to say his son was gay. And I believe it was you, Vanita, who first brought it up. The granddaughter, Ariana. Ike is unable to call her his granddaughter until the very end of the book. He keeps referring to her as the girl or the child, but he will never say granddaughter. There's even a moment where Maya says, she's your granddaughter too, or something along those lines. And he just kind of says nothing because he still can't even acknowledge the fact that she is related to him and his granddaughter. Um, I'm trying to think, perhaps you guys have a better memory of this than I do. I'm not sure if Buddy Lee ever calls her his granddaughter. Does he? Does anyone remember that? No? Yeah, I don't remember either. But perhaps he does. If he doesn't, then that's a similarity. Uh, but yeah, that's where the differences really came up. Also, I guess even just in terms of the relationship that both men have with Ariana, Buddy Lee is very willing to step into that grandfather role while Ike really distances himself from her, essentially leaving all of the care up to Maya. Of course, that could perhaps be a misogyny thing, thinking that it's her responsibility, but even outside of that, I do think it's because he has a discomfort with acknowledging her as his granddaughter. Um, so yeah. Okay, let's talk about the part of the book that pissed me off the most. What did you guys think of Buddy Lee's decision to lie about the cemetery being destroyed?
The first thing I thought was, sir, now why would you lie about that? Why did you lie? Why would you lie about that? I think that really pissed me off because one thing is, I feel like as grown people, like, why are you lying? Like, what is the benefit of you lying to someone? Like, at this big age, like, as children, yes, I understand. There was a reason because, you might get punished, you might get something taken away. It's a reason when you're a child, for some people. But as an adult, why are you lying? I just could not understand that. And about something that was so sensitive, something that was so detrimental to them. Why would you lie about that? So that definitely pissed me off for sure.
I would say it was a little bit of a, because I kept thinking, would why would the people who killed Derek um, and Isaiah, why would they turn around and then desecrate the grave? I was like, I mean, why would you do that? Because that would bring more attention when you've killed these men. It's kind of like, as they say, a professional hit, right? You kill them and you go on by your business. So why come back and do that? So to find out that he did that, I was right along with you guys. I was pissed, but at the same time, it was kind of like, well, that was the quickest way he knew to get a reaction, or that, so that's what he thought. This would be the quickest way to get a reaction out of Ike and get him on board with what I want him to do. So that's what he did. So, and in many ways, it was definitely a very selfish act, but in the end, he got what he wanted. So
Yeah, I was also confused at first. I was like, why would anybody? I just thought it was just a hate crime, and that Buddy Lee kind of said like, oh, it was probably them as a way to just get Ike to do something. And I was like, well, I mean, I think it's just people being rude, to say the least. And then yeah, then when I realized it was him, I was like, whoa, bruh, like what? I was kind of taken aback because um yeah, I didn't expect that so to speak, but yeah, I'm like I can't, yeah. I was like, well, I guess you got what you wanted out of the whole situation, but yeah, I agree with everybody else. I was just don't lie. Bad.
Yeah, I'd agree with everybody else as well. Lying is bad, but I guess you could view it as like the end justifying the means somehow. Because I did say so himself that he wouldn't have done it otherwise. Uh, but yeah, that was so scummy of him. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. That part of the book made me so angry. Uh, my first initial thought when I read that is look what happens when you trust a white person. Because I just could not understand why anyone would do that, especially as Buddy Lee keeps harping on the fact that he's not racist. You literally wrote N-word lover on a gay black man's grave. So what is that about? Um, so yeah, and I was surprised that like Ike didn't have more of a violent reaction to hearing the news. He was just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna walk away, don't talk to me anymore. Um, but yeah, that was just like, come on now. And like you guys were saying, I will say that was one part of the book that did, I guess, surprise me. I did not expect that Buddy Lee would have done it. I kept trying to figure out who would have. Um, like you all said, I did not think it would be the, what do they call themselves? The rare breed, the biker gang. I didn't think it would be them. That just doesn't really make much sense why they would care about putting that much effort into antagonizing these two gay people that they killed. Um, but I was also thinking to myself, who else could it be? Because yes, while Isaiah was a reporter, he wasn't very famous. I mean, he worked for a very, very small publication. So it wasn't like he was like, I mean, maybe he was, but he probably wasn't very well known around town for being a journalist, or for having a white husband. And because both of their names sound pretty racially ambiguous, I mean, what is Derek's last name? Jenkins? Uh, it may be a bit hard to tell if that's a black person or a white person. So you would have to have known them when they were alive to know that one is black and one is white. Um, so yeah, it just didn't really make any sense, and I couldn't picture anyone else doing it. But Buddy Lee doing it was just so, ugh, just so scummy. And like, I liked Buddy Lee, but that part I was like, what the hell were you thinking? But yeah.
I would say even too, Jonathan, where people mentioned like some things were kind of forced because I did think that. I was like, well, okay, we got to have this part where the protagonists are mad at each other, and so what this is what has to happen for for this part to take place, and then they'll get back together and all of that. So yeah, I mean, it was like I said, I was surprised it was Buddy Lee, but at the same time was kind of like, okay, well that if you want to make somebody be like mad and walk away, that would be the thing.
Yeah. And it's funny because when they kind of like separate, when Buddy Lee tells Ike, it kind of felt like they were breaking up because they became so close, and then like they're just done with one another after he tells him that. Um, okay, let's talk about everyone's reaction, everyone's thoughts on Buddy Lee's reaction. Yeah, rom-com, right? Everyone's reaction to Ike's reaction to the guy flirting with him at the bar. What did you guys think of that?
I really wish that was explored more. I feel like we were almost going to explore it whenever Buddy Lee was asking questions, and then it just never got addressed again. I think it's a pretty typical reaction, about, like just the heteronormativity and like don't be gay, even though they're in a gay bar. And I think that was also mentioned that they were like, bro, what do you mean? Like we're in a gay bar. You didn't think you were gonna get hit on a gay bar, especially since now we know that it's, Daddy Ike. So like you're in a gay bar, you're, there, and you're apparently very attractive. So and you could have just said no like, I don't know. I just thought that was very interesting, especially since I had just talked to somebody about that was in charge of that organization for violence against queer youth, and that I also mentioned about like not being nice, um, like to his son and all that. And I thought that would have been a really good moment to address homophobia and the violent reaction that can happen because of homophobia and why it's so detrimental to like everyone. and why that reaction was so maybe like visceral, and maybe talking about that. Because Buddy Lee asked, and Ike was like, no, I don't want to talk about it. And then they literally didn't. And I was like, what do you mean? That was like the perfect segue into talking about something a lot deeper, a lot more about maybe intersectionality or like something. And I just don't know what purpose that scene served, and I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts for sure.
Well, uh, my reaction was exactly like you said, very typical. And again, because I have lots of men in my life like this, I was like, yep, I could totally see that. And especially because I thought you used the perfect word, visceral, because especially with um, Black men, I feel like there's this visceral reaction to gay, queer people, and I I don't understand it. I don't understand where it comes from. And maybe I'm just being naive, but I don't really know. And again, I've always thought, how can a oppressed minority be so hateful to another oppressed minority? I just that's never made sense to me. So yeah, I do agree that it wasn't really gone into depth. But again, I think there's a lot of things in this book like that uh, that I wish had gone into more detail, more depth, and explored more to give more um, to just really even have a I don't know, more insight to these characters. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Grace.
Um, my take on the bar scene is that, okay, sir, a man has hit on you before. You've been to prison. Like, come on now. I think that was like the most thing. And not even only that, you're in a space where um it's likely to happen. Like, you just say, maybe I'm not interested, or are you interested? So it's like, I mean, what's the problem? Just say either I'm not who I am. So I'm just like, to me, it was just like, sir, you've talked to a gay man before, and we're just going to leave it there.
I didn't even think of the prison aspect. That is so funny. That's so yeah. Um but, yeah. What was it? Yeah, the immediate reaction of violence, like an arm touch, is never that serious. His rationale of like his boundaries being crossed and like overblown, sure, whatever. I feel like in more hypermasculine or macho cultures, violence is masculine. And when you're faced with like the pure opposite of that in the form of fruitiness, then it's almost like an attack to them or like an affront. And they in turn have to respond in a way that reaffirms how masculine they are or how rigid they are or how they view themselves or how they should be in a way. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about the bar scene, aside from the coconuts. And
Yeah, like you mentioned, Grace. I really wish we would have talked about that more in the story. That is kind of a pivotal scene for Ike, still trying to, while he is seeking revenge for homophobes killing his gay son, he is still unable to fully accept, I guess, being around queer people. Um, so I think that would have been a really good opportunity to expand upon that. Um, I will say, might sound a little bad. I'm kind of on Ike's side. I mean, I wasn't a fan of how everyone in that scene was painting Ike out to be this like hateful, like gay bashing black man. When Ike I mean, yes, he was rude from the start, but Ike very clearly expressed, hey, I'm uninterested a few times before the man grabbed him. Um, and I don't mean to insert myself in this. Obviously, the story is not about me, but I have a very similar approach to flirting. I'm open to it. My one rule is do not touch me. Then I get upset. So when Ike grabbed the man by his collar, I was clapping like the amount of times I wanted to do that in gay bars. Like I totally understand the feeling. So I don't know. And then even looking at it from like an optics perspective, the way in which I don't remember the guy's name. One of the guys, the white guys that was sitting at the bar table where Ike talked to the guy who runs the like queer youth shelter or school or whatever. He is so readily interested in attacking Ike the second that Ike touches the guy who touched him. But because he's looking at it from the perspective of here is this, like, I guess, seemingly straight guy about to attack this gay guy. But you can't think of the optics of you're this white guy ready to attack this black man. Like, I don't know. Wasn't really a fan of how everyone was painting it out to be a gay and a straight thing, but no one was looking at it from any other kind of perspective. But yeah, could have gone a lot further there, but unfortunately, we did not. Now, Grace, I know you mentioned earlier Tangerine feeling underdeveloped. I'm not sure who has read the book reviews on Goodreads, but while most of them are positive, the ones that are negative primarily mention how all of the female characters feel underdeveloped. Maya, Christine, what was Buddy Lee's neighbor's name? I don't remember her name, but her too, and Tangerine. I'm curious, does everyone notice that critique across the board, or do you think it only applies to Tangerine in this story?
Oh, it's so good that you brought that up because I would have liked to see Buddy Lee and Margot. Her name is Margot. I would love to have seen Buddy Lee and Margot kind of like get the thing but get a thing going, maybe get his life on track, buy a house in a trailer park, That's what I was kind of thinking for them. But I do, at one point, I remember thinking, who is Maya? Like, I feel like it took them a little while to introduce and actually say that Maya was like his mom. And I don't know if that was just me, but they didn't quite mention her like as, Maya being his mom. Um, and even for the daughter, I believe her name was Ariana. They didn't like focus on how she was feeling, They didn't, I don't feel like they had a proper conversation with Ariana into that maybe that she lost her dad, how life was going to be for her, just different perspectives like that. So I think that the women were very underdeveloped. I think I spoke on Tangerine previously before, but I would have liked to seen her story be talked about a little bit more. They were definitely very underdeveloped in regards to not just at least a little bit, giving us a backstory, as we had a little backstory on Ike and Buddy Lee, but we didn't have a lot of backstory on any of the other people that I felt like was in depth enough for me, I would say.
Correct. Fully agree. Uh, if everyone, okay, this is my face anytime a man writes a woman. Boop, I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm really not. Usually I'm pleasantly surprised when we get depth from a male author on women. And I'm thinking about this book now. Do we feel like this book passed the Bechdel test at all? Or all the women always mention men the whole time also? So we didn't get any interactions between two women talking to each other. We didn't get any, like I said, like I just feel like a lot of times male authors use women as plot devices, plot points, and they just kind of move on with their life. And so yeah, I mean, like I like the book. The book was fun, but I was just like, okay, so you're the wife, you're the caretaker, you're the girlfriend, you're the mistress, right? And we just didn't get a lot more of that. And I think it was a bummer because just what we did get from all of the women in the story where they were kind of badass and pretty cool. And it would have been great to have more breadth and depth. Especially like the very blip that we had of them going into the newsroom and meeting I forgot what her name was, but she was a lesbian and she seemed like she would have been so cool, and that would have been a great jumping point for some depth in there too. Like whenever they first went to the reporter's office where yeah, I think it was, yeah, Derek worked or the other one or whatever. But she seemed amazing and seemed like if she would have come back in that story more, like maybe they would have called her or somehow she would have, I don't know. It just, yeah. It's always disappointing sometimes when it comes to that. But I set my expectations there, but I fully 100% agree so far. Yeah.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add. I think you guys are really bringing great points to it because um, I actually have forgot about the young lady at the newsroom, and you're right because she came off like a badass, but we didn't really get to explore that, see that, or anything like that. And as you mentioned, the women just being, kind of just here just to move the plot along because even when um, Maya got the call about the house being on fire, and I was just screaming at the book at this point, like, really, you're gonna fall for that? You're gonna fall for your house being on fire? Like that doesn't even make sense. So I was like, okay, we got to move the story along, and they're using her to do it. So I totally agree.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add that you guys haven't touched upon. Yeah.
It's so funny, Vanita, that you bring up Maya and the house fire thing. That was another part that really pissed me off because I was like, honestly, Buddy Lee, this is the one time I will give you permission to just knock her out, to shut her up, because there's no way she can actually fall for that. I mean, unless Buddy Lee lived like directly across the street, you actually think you'd make it home in time before your entire house burned down if your house is actually on fire. You'd make it home in time to save a photograph. Really? I'm like, what are we doing? Um, like, Buddy Lee just knocked her out one good time. I'm sure Ike will understand. But yeah. And it's funny, Grace, that you bring up the lesbian who I believe she was Isaiah's boss at the publication he worked at. Um, Unfortunately, I forgot about her too. I don't even remember her name. The one thing I do remember, though, and this probably also ties back to a little bit of misogyny from our male characters throughout the story, is when she leaves, Buddy Lee says something to the effect of, "Do you think she's single?" or something like that to Ike. And Ike says, "Well, she's a lesbian." And then Buddy Lee says something like, "What everyone needs a man, you never know." And I was like, really? Okay. Sure. But yeah, if it's not obvious, yes, I do agree with the critique that a lot of the female characters felt very underdeveloped, especially Maya. I can kind of understand it in terms of Christine because we're not getting any of the other characters' perspectives outside of Buddy Lee and Ike. And of course, we sometimes get Grayson, the bike or gang leader's perspective, but we're not getting any of the female perspectives. So because he and Christine are not together anymore, it does make sense we're not going to get much of her. But because Maya and Ike have had such a long, tumultuous relationship, um, we should be getting a lot more development from Maya's character. But unfortunately, the author chose not to do that. And like Grace mentioned, this has been a consistent issue when we read books in this club that are by men. When they have female characters, the female characters feel so underdeveloped. And I think when that keeps happening for a male author, I think it just showcases how they probably are not in community with any women in their lives, because if you know them, you can gain a perspective and then obviously write more well-rounded characters. You can view women in your story as people, human beings, not just plot devices. But I don't know. I also know the author's married to a woman, so I'm like, you didn't ask her anything. Why not? But okay. Uh, yeah. Okay, now this is a question that the author poses. It's also a question that is recycled from our meeting when we discussed the Seven Moons of Molly Almeida a few months ago. Do you think that Ike or Buddy Lee would have changed their relationships with their sons had they not died? Or do you think their death was necessary?
I'll be the first to say absolutely not. I don't think, maybe with Buddy Lee, because I think with the granddaughter coming into play, I think maybe he would have been more like, okay, I got a granddaughter, I don't know anything about her, I would like to get to know her. I think with I don't see that happening. And I think the other thing, because as we're talking about, the female characters not being developed, because there were times that I was kind of like with Maya, I was like, okay, is she just tolerating Ariana because she has to? There's nobody else. So she's just kind of like, well, I got this kid I got to deal with now. So yeah, I don't think I definitely feel like I probably would not have um, got a relationship with his son.
I would say absolutely not. I feel like if they were going to have a relationship, they would have had one from the beginning. So no, I don't think that the granddaughter would have like made that any better, because I feel like I don't know if they mentioned how old she is, but it was long enough for you to be around and build a relationship. So I feel like no, I don't think that if this situation did not happen with the sons, I don't think they would have like changed. Like I can't see them, going to have a conversation with Tangerine, or I just don't see it. No.
Yeah, I agree with everybody else. And I think we know people like this in our life where it takes some super dramatic trauma to get them to like reevaluate their life. And I really wish it wouldn't take such extreme measures for people to realize that they're gonna die one day, that no day is guaranteed, and that you should do what you got to do and just open up their mind to other people. Um, and no, absolutely not. I don't think that would have happened, I was at I mean, this is kind of along similar lines. I actually thought about this book. I did a Buddhist retreat last weekend, and one of the meditations was on death. And it was, if we treated every day, if we said, I may die today, every morning, how much would that improve our day? How much nicer would we be to people? How much would we progress? How much would we realize that some of the things that we think are super important and that really agitate us really aren't worth our time at all? And so I think a lot of people don't think about death. And then when it happens, it's very jarring. And then, not really realizing how much you loved your child until they're dead is like very sad. And I don't think Ike or Buddy Lee would ever have had a relationship with their sons until they were confronted with that aspect of life, which is impermanence. So,
Oh, yeah. I don't think a relationship would happen. Um, yeah. I don't really have anything else to add as that everybody didn't touch on. But just to add on Grace's point, um, I'm very much well aware of everything's impermanence, but here I am still doom scrolling at the end of the day. Which is, yeah. So
Yeah, I agree with you all. I'm not sure that I strongly do not believe that Ike would have made any attempt to reach out to Isaiah had Isaiah not have died. I believe early on in the book, Ike says something like, I always imagined in our older age, we would just kind of work it out. So that would, I'm assuming, be like several years from now. They would have finally had the conversations and, gotten over their differences and whatnot. Um, and very similar to our discussion when we discussed Molly Almeida, is like death really puts a lot of things into perspective for people. We consistently take people for granted because we have this idea in our mind that like death will never happen to us, death will never happen to anyone that we truly care about. So you tend to kind of be flippant with the way you treat your loved ones. And then, of course, when someone dies, I remember someone mentioned this when we discussed the funeral part of the book. When someone dies, you're like throwing yourself on the casket and saying, oh my God, why me? Take me instead, even though it's someone you haven't spoken to in like 10 years, right? So how much do you really care about them? Um, so yeah, I don't know. I'm just not really convinced that I could make the change. Now, Buddy Lee, however, I think would probably reach out. And I think a large part of that is because Buddy Lee is dying anyway. And just like I was saying, death puts things into perspective. I think as Buddy Lee's condition got worse, he would have at the very least tried to reach out to Derek. Um, and just based on the very little that we know about Derek, it does seem like Derek would have been responsive. So I think that could have happened, but Ike, unfortunately, I have no no hope for. Um, yeah. Okay, now I'm curious, how long in the book did it take you to figure out who the killer was? Or I guess the person who set up the killing.
Guess what, guys? Not until the end of the book. Listen, this was like my first so wow. And I'm not gonna tell you guys, I was shocked. I was like, oh my goodness, the husband. So it took me very later on in the book to figure out who the killer was.
Um, yeah, I think it was like page 100. I think I was suspicious because all the characters in the book, there was only so many people that were mentioned. But it really was solidified to me that there was a part when Grayson was talking to well, we didn't know it was the judge on the phone, but then Grayson said, I want to shove that gavel down someone's throat. And I was like, boom. I was like, I was right. And then at the end, I was like, right, right. But I read a lot of mysteries and I also listen to a lot of oh, what is it? Just like murder mystery type podcasts and stuff. So I I'm usually pretty good at it now, like just pattern recognition at this point. But I love that people were able to be, shocked. So yeah, I was just curious how it was gonna go. Like once I figured it out, I was like, ooh, how are they gonna react to this news?
Yeah, I think it was when I can't remember, but when um the actually even talking about the husband and how he didn't, how he, didn't like um gay, was not an ally or anything, just totally against the queer community. And I kept thinking, kind of like you were saying, Grace, I don't read a lot of mysteries, but I have read a lot of them, but I was like, so my mind was like, okay, who would it be? Who would make sense that it would be? And I was like, it's probably him. He's the one that would make sense that he would be hiding and really be the person who's caused all this rhetoric. And so yeah, so I can't say I got it right off like you, but it was kind of like I was like, it has to be somebody, and he was the one that made sense to me.
Yeah, I was very much like Sierra. I only got it when they revealed it. Like at the I was like, oh, okay, work. Like I don't know, but I just do not have the capacity to be a detective, I guess. Like I don't know, like yeah.
Yeah. Not to sound like a smarty pants or a know-it-all, but I want to say it was like chapter 8 or so. I like figured it out. There's the part where Buddy Lee and Ike go to talk to the guy that works at the bakery that Derek worked at. And the guy says something like, Derek wanted to expose him because he was a hypocrite. The second he said hypocrite, I wrote in my notebook, I said, so this must be someone who is either a religious figure in their community or a conservative political figure. And then I figured, okay, if this is someone who is anti-queer, then that means that the woman that Derek met must either be a trans woman or a drag queen, especially because the name Tangerine is not very common. I was leaning more towards drag queen. I perhaps would have preferred had we gone that route, but yeah, it was like she either must be trans or be a drag queen. And then it's like I think the next chapter or two, we mentioned that Derek's stepfather and Christine, his mother's husband, is a conservative judge who is like very anti-LGBTQ. And I was like, yep, it's him, because there's no one else that it would actually really make sense for. Um, Unfortunately, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think, was the author intentionally kind of giving us little tidbits to help us figure out pretty early on, or no offense, did the author think he was being clever with his reveal? I don't know. So yeah, figured it out pretty early on. Now, what did you guys think of the killer's motive, the judge's motive?
That I
I'm,
thought, oh, go ahead, Sierra.
I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna say when it's done in the dark, it comes to the light. That's what I gotta say about it. You know, what it is done in the dark, it is coming to the light. So ultimately, I feel like, he went through a lot to try to cover that little secret up, but I'm like, it still was a fact, I feel like it would have made it eventually. So I feel like it was a tad bit dramatic, but I mean, hey, what's done in the dark comes to the light.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting enough. I had just finished a book that was kind of similar in the sense of the person was who got killed was a radio personality who just their whole thing was I hate gays, I kill them, all this kind of stuff. And then this person was gay, so I was like, oh, okay, another story with this kind of this kind of theme going on. So yeah, it wasn't too surprising in many ways, but so yeah, and what that, like you said, was he trying to was did he feel like he was being clever? Because I kind of thought that I was like, well, like I said, I felt like so many things happened in the book that I was like, really, is this what we're doing? But again, it was like, all right, you're trying to get the story to move on. So
Oh yeah. Um, just in life, I always feel like the call is always coming from inside the house. I was just like, typical, like how many stories, like real life stories, do we have of the most like crazily homophobic out there like person that is on like Grinder, right? Or I mean, you're just like, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's yep.
Go ahead, Arian.
Oh no, nothing. I wasn't gonna add much, but I was just gonna say, you love to see it. You love to see karma. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. It's unfortunate, but so predictable. I mean, these things do happen in real life. We consistently see trans women who are murdered by men they are dating or sleeping with. Oftentimes, because there is this fear around her spilling the beans or a word getting out that he has an attraction or a relationship with a trans person. So he kind of kills her to silence it. Interestingly enough, they never have enough foresight to see, like, when you're found guilty for her murder, it's going to be pretty obvious you were probably connected to her in some way. But whatever. Now, that is an issue I do have with this book. I don't know who will agree with this, but I am very, very sick and tired of queer stories where the villain who targets our queer main character is queer themselves. I think it keeps pushing this narrative that we as queer people are our own oppressors. And I think that is, first of all, wildly inaccurate, but second of all, incredibly dangerous. I think that causes us to point the finger at ourselves when we actually should be getting mad at like true conservatives. There are plenty of straight people who hurt us way more than we hurt ourselves. But, for the sake of this story, and of course, the story being written by a straight person, I will give it a break. But yeah, very, very sick and tired of that happening in queer stories. Um, okay, let's talk about the ending. What did everyone think of this book's ending?
I was happy. I guess the good guys won, the bad guys lost. I was sad about Buddy Lee dying, but it was kind of like if anybody, was going to die, he was already heading that way. So him dying, and because I think it was you, Jonathan, who mentioned, it kind of you already saw where he would be the one to take the rap or in some way, and that's pretty much what happened. And I was kind of again, I was glad to see I go to the grave sites and kind of have this moment, but at the same time it was kind of this kind of typical. Oh, here we are, this typical. Oh, now I see the light. You're gone. I've kind of redeemed myself because I got the people who killed you, and yeah, so yeah, I would say if things that I didn't really have, I definitely agree with you about the whole thing of, these stories. Cause like I said, I had just read a story, kind of this, same thing. This person who's, just spewing all this hate is actually gay themselves. And then to have this story, this person is involved in a trans person and literally going to the extremes that they went to just not have it come out. Um, yeah, like you said, I feel like that story kind of just gets told over and over again. And like you said, this whole thing of making it seem like, that the, basically, the queer community is the one that's really, hurting themselves when that's not true at all.
My overall opinion of the book, I would say I enjoy the fact that overall they got their form of justice for them, which made them, I guess, feel better, or I guess sleep better with the situation. I don't know if they feel better or not. Well, not Buddy Lee, may he rest in peace. But I meaning like Ike and the rest of the family, I do like the fact that, they are going to care for the granddaughter Ariana. So I do like that. So I would, say that I enjoyed that part mostly about it. I was sad that Bucky Lee had to go. So I think that overall, I think that I enjoyed so much the end of it, because I would hope that they will be able to right their wrongs kind of with the granddaughter. Not that they will be able to fix anything, but they can try to be a little better, maybe with raising her. But God forbid she turns out to be a lesbian, then what will happen then? So that I do think about that often when I'm thinking about how would the book play out. Like, oh God, what if she's a lesbian? Like, are they going to go back down this downward spiral again? Are they going to be, here again? So I kind of did, enjoy the ending, in regards to that part, I guess I would say.
We love it when a bunch of racist, homophobic bikers get blown up. So I will say that was very I was like, hooray! I was just waiting. I was waiting for something to happen. I was like, oh. So that felt really good because he definitely, the author, hammed up how awful the main biker guy was, and I was just ready. I was I was ready for it. Um, and I think it ended as good as it could, and little by Lee. I mean, I knew something was gonna happen, like just because I'm like, you coughing up blood, man. This is not gonna good. This is not gonna be good. So someone has to die, right? And I know that these stories, you have to have some sort of twist and turn. I was like, who's gonna die? I'm very curious, and so all in all, I really like the ending. I'm hoping that with Tangerine being there, and if the granddaughter ends up growing up to be a lesbian, that maybe Tangerine has 15 years to work with Ike to kind of have him understand the queer community better. Um, and yeah, I just think it was a fast-paced, heavy action novel, and I think it did what it set out to do for sure.
Now, I love a happy ending. A happy enough ending, I guess, ignoring all the death, ignoring Buddy Lee, just death. But like you were prepared for it. Like the death flags were there, like coughing up blood, like everything, all that. So there was build up to that. Um, I I love seeing the biker guy get got. Um, it was so therapeutic. It really was so satisfying. And I love a hopeful ending. Like the ending, I love it when things are looking up for people in the ending. Um, yeah, Tangerine got a job. She's working steady. She has stable footing. Ariana and has a more present grandfather. Everyone's like coming more into terms with how everything happened. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I also like the ending. I mean, like I've said a few times now, it was predictable, sure. I mean, I wasn't shocked at what happened in the end, but I was happy with it. Um, I, like you guys are all saying, I'm so glad that the biker gang got their comeuppance. The unfortunate part about that, I guess, is that it seemed like they're a very, very large gang that spans more than just Grayson's little faction of the gang. So I guess they're not fully done, but the ones that we meet in the story are taken out. So I was happy about that. Um, I was also happy, one step at a time. Yeah, pace myself. Um, yeah, I was very happy about that. I was also happy to see how Buddy Lee and Ike were able to come together towards the end. And then that little beautiful moment where, as Buddy Lee is slowly dying, he says to Ike, like, please stay with me or hold me, whatever. And Ike does. I thought that was so sweet. I was like, oh, just kiss one time, please. but of course they're not gay characters. But I did want a little bit of a gay kiss. Yeah, I was happy. Like someone on Discord mentioned that Ariana did not die, and they were both points. That Ariana and Maya did not die. I was really hoping for that. I was a little bit scared when the car accident scene happened. I thought perhaps Maya was going to die, especially because Grayson says it looks like she broke her neck. I was like, if they kill Maya in this story, I am going to lose it. But thankfully, she survived, or Queen Maya survived. I was very happy to see that Tangerine worked for Ike in the end. I do hope she sticks around. It seems like she now has a community of people who actually have a desire to care about her. Um, so I think that's great. I was also a bit surprised the element of found family showing up in this story. I mean, we see that consistently throughout queer stories, this element of found family, but I was very pleasantly surprised to see it happen in the end of this story. I also love the moment where Buddy Lee is buried next to Ike and next to Derek. Also loved the fact that Ike paid for the service. That was very beautiful. Um, yeah, and of course, I mean, I can't not talk about the little speech that Ike gives Isaiah and Derek, and how even in the end, he's able to finally embrace Derek as not just Isaiah's husband, but as someone who loved his child, and saying how you have to love those who love your children because they step in when you can't. I love that. I listened to the audiobook, and around that part of the book, I want to say I was on the bus riding home from work, and I was like, I gotta really toughen up because I don't want to cry. But if I was a more emotional person, I would have cried during that scene. And yeah. And then of course, I found myself kind of questioning the book's title, like why is it called Razorblade Tears? And then at the end, Ike mentions, these tears in my face no longer feel like razor blades because I've earned them. I've earned the right to mourn my son. Um, and yeah, that was so, so beautiful. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with I think it's like the 50s movie, The Defiant Ones. Very similar story in a lot of ways. Um, and I'm not sure if the author wrote this book based on that story or not, because it is so similar. But I do like how this end kind of fixes the end of that story. Um, I don't know who's familiar with the trope magical Negro, but that movie is very much that trope. And I like the fact that instead of the Black person dying for the white person dies for the Black person, as they should. So yeah, love that. Now, what did you guys think of Ike and Buddy Lee's growth throughout the story? Or do you think they grew?
Feel like it's more of like an action verb, like they're growing. I think they did grow and they're continuing to grow and they're gonna keep growing. Because they started negative points and then they probably got up into like one or two of the positives, and then hopefully we'll keep moving up. And Buddy Lee's deceased now, so can't grow anymore. But I feel like there was growth during the story, and Ike is hopefully going to just continue to grow because it sounds like he was on his way.
I have to say I'm over here laughing and making comments, but my fingers don't move fast enough to type with some of the things you guys are saying. But yes, I totally agree with you, Grace, that they're growing. There was definitely some growth that took place. And I think, because as Jonathan mentioned at the end, Ike saying, you love the person who loves your child, and realizing that that's really that all that any parent should really want for their child. Don't for their child, who cares if it's a person of the same sex or not. So yeah, I think they definitely had some growth go on, and Yeah.
I would say I definitely think that they grew some. Now they still have some growing to do, if I'm going to be completely honest. But I want to see how much, if they are growing, I would love to see how much they've grown up. If Ariana turns out to be a lesbian, I would love to see that growth come into play because I do feel like they've like, grown a little bit, but I feel like if a situation happened, I don't know. So I would say it was definitely some progression. But I would like to maybe see something else kind of happen to kind of see if there is some growth there.
I find it so funny how Sierra had canons Ariana to be a lesbian. And you know what? I love that. Like it would just be like a full circle moment. It'll give Ike and Maya a chance to redeem themselves, to showcase their actual growth and how much they were growing. And yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that both Ike and Buddy Lee grew. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I do think that Buddy Lee he already pretty much accepted Derek's sexuality and, of course, Isaiah's marriage to Derek. Um, but I think even in terms of his own, I guess, racist conditioning, he grew out of that too. There's that moment where Buddy Lee is talking to Ike about watching the Ten Commandments on TV and his grandfather making a racist joke. Buddy Lee talks about finally being able to understand that that joke is harmful, and then having to come to terms with the fact that a lot of the things he probably heard and saw growing up, while he may not acknowledge it, or he wouldn't have acknowledged it prior, he can now acknowledge how harmful those things are. And then having to grapple with the fact that the people you love in your life, in this case his grandfather, can also be bad people. And I think that also helps him understand his own son. It seems like even though the relationship wasn't great, there was love there to a certain degree. And then Derek having to understand while he loves his father is not necessarily the best person. Um, so yeah, I think he grows in that aspect. And I think I grew pretty well too. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, he obviously is able to embrace Derek and Isaiah. Um, and of course accept Ariana as his grandfather, as his granddaughter, not his grandfather. um, But like you all mentioned, I am curious to see where their relationship goes, he and Ariana's relationship. And perhaps she is queer herself. And like, how will he accept that? I think a lot of grandparents view grandchildren as like a do-over. I know my grandmother told me that like she always kind of saw me as a bit of a do-over for the children that she's had and certain mistakes that she's made when they were growing up. So I am curious to see how that goes. But yeah, I do think they both made tremendous growth throughout the story. Now, Sierra, you brought up something interesting earlier in the meeting. This idea of like being in heaven and like, could you or could you not forgive these men if they were your father? I'm curious, do you guys believe that, let's say, for the sake of the story, Isaiah and Derek are looking down on what Buddy Lee and Ike have done? Do you think they forgive their fathers?
For me, based off the character that it seems like as people are speaking about them and talking about their relationships with them, I feel like they may be forgiving of them. I feel like they may forgive their father. I believe that they are, I would say.
Yeah, I just coming from
troubled relationships with my own father. I feel like forgiveness is also a journey. And so seeing any kind of sorrow for the way that, you might have treated a child and then like the child having to like respond, I feel like maybe not total forgiveness, but like a watchful eye and more of a understanding of like the parents and seeing them trying because it just seemed like in the book they even mentioned that Ike and Buddy Lee never tried really at all to understand or would just make jokes or just be abusive towards them. And so I think, forgiveness is also a journey, just like growing out of Buddy Lee and Ike's upbringing too. So I would say they're on their way to forgiveness. That was probably me projecting myself into the situation.
Uh, sorry. Yes, I would think, and pretty much as Sierra said, how Derek and Isaiah are portrayed by everyone else. I could see them being forgiving and maybe even just kind of shaking their heads a little bit like, yeah, so typical of our dads to take this route to be violent. But hey, if it's what they need to do, then that's what they'll do. So yeah, I could see them forgiving them.
Yeah, I could see them forgiving them as well, especially since Isaiah or both of them, I'm pretty sure, were making active attempts to like, interact with their fathers even like right before their wedding. There's like some aspect or like degree to them still wanting their fathers or their parents in their life or like some aspect of their approval. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the fact that both Isaiah and Derek were still willing to communicate with their fathers, even though their fathers were never really that supportive or receptive to their attempts to communicate with them and share their lives with each other. I think that shows that they're pretty much on the edge of just being willing to move past all of their childhood trauma just to like have a relationship with their fathers. And I think all that both Derek and Isaiah wanted from their fathers was an apology. And I mean, while I guess you could say violence is not the answer, I do believe all of the violence and this desire to get to the bottom of things and avenge them is sort of an apology. So, like, I mean, if my dad, not that I'm saying I want my dad to go out killing people, but if he did this for me, I'd be like, hell yeah. Thank you. So, I mean, I do think that, they would be forgiving. Okay. And lastly, since our two main characters are straight men, but the story I would argue revolves around two queer characters, do you believe this book is a queer story? Or do you not?
I would say that's a good question. I would say, is it? Now, the reason I say is it, because we didn't get into Derek's and Isaiah's life too much. So, yes, there was like, gay, things going on, but it didn't necessarily speak to like, I guess go a little bit more depth into their gay relationship, maybe how it started, their childhood. So yeah, I think I'm gonna say that. Yeah. now, I'll say yes. Mm,
Yeah, I would agree. It kind of felt like a straight people having to encounter queer culture against their will. Is kind of how it felt a little bit. And it was more about the relationship of fathers with queerness. So I don't I wouldn't consider this a queer story per se. It just happens that they are having to dive into a world that they're extremely unfamiliar with, and how they reconcile that with their upbringing is more of how it felt for me.
Okay, I'll go. So I often face this question. I feel like this question was also raised previously in a previous meeting, but having read a lot of yaoi and shonen ai, and most of those probably being written by women, uh, that question comes to my mind a lot. I feel like story okay, wait, here's an example. Stories featuring gay men usually use MXM or MLM rather than like the explicit use of gay whenever it's like written by women. Uh, this is something I came across in like a subreddit. Um, and I never really noticed until now, but like the covers with like men with rippling abs and like hyper realistic. You could really tell the difference between something that is like really broody or queer in a sense. Um, I would say this story could be gay, but I don't think it's necessarily queer. I feel like there's a distinction between the two. Um, you could have a story about something gay or about something queer, but they're not necessarily um I will they're not technically they are, but like in essence they're not necessarily gay or queer, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but
Yeah, similar to what you guys are saying, I'm not sure. I think I'm probably leaning towards this not being a queer story. Again, because like I mentioned earlier, we are getting so little about Isaiah and Derek, and focusing on the relationships they had with their fathers. We're really just hearing about their relationships from one perspective. Um, so yeah, straight written by a straight man with two straight characters. I'm not sure if I'd go out on a limb and say it's a queer story, unfortunately. But good try, I guess. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, that wraps up all I have in my notes. Before we move on to talking about our books for next month, does anyone have any last minute questions, comments, characters they want to go over, plot lines they want to go over before we move on? Anything? Going once, going twice. Okay. Oh, go ahead, Nita.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Off
go
mute. I'm
ahead.
sorry. I just want to quickly say that um, I want to thank you all for actually reading the book and coming to have a good discussion. I have attended other book clubs and other online book clubs, and you can immediately know when a group hasn't read the book. So this was very refreshing. So thank you all very much.
I'll say you're very welcome. I always say, while our club is small, we are fierce. And we do actually read the books. I feel like it's a typical like book club thing where there's always one person who doesn't read and just kind of like piggybacks off of what someone before them said. But as you can see in here, we all read the book. Um, so yeah. And I guess I'll just say one last little thing before we move on. Um, this book had some racial slurs I have not heard of outside of like a period piece or like a textbook. A lot of these things, I was like, who actually talks like this? I mean, I guess I'm just not surrounded by like overtly racist white people to where they're using these kinds of slurs out loud, but things like silverback and porch monkey, I was like, what the fuck? But yeah. Um, okay. Now moving on to our potential books for next month. As always, I do have 2 books picked out. I will post the books descriptions in the chat, and then you all can read the descriptions and then let me know which one you'd rather read. The first one is called The Marrow Thieves by Sherry Demeline. There's that one. And the second one is Crosshairs by Catherine Hernandez. I was looking back on all the books we've read, and we've covered just about everything. I just do not believe we have read a dystopian novel. So both of these books are dystopian novels. So we can kind of get that out of the way. Okay, read those and let me know which one you guys would rather read next month.
I'm kind of leaning towards Marrow Thieves, but then Crosshair also seems really interesting.
Yeah, I am leaning, I am also leaning towards the Marrow Thieves. Because it looks like that's hold on. Because that looks like that's an indigenous author, and I don't know if we've read anything from an indigenous author for me in this book club yet. Is my thoughts so far. But I'm also looking up both the books on Storygraph because I love Storygraph a lot. So see what folks say over there too.
Okay. Do you have any opinions either way, Benita, or are you kind of down for whatever?
Yeah, I think I'm cool with whichever one you guys want to do.
Okay, well, um, I'll just pick. I was originally leaning towards Crosshairs because I guess, bit of a spoiler alert, I know this book is inspired by the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting. Um, so I was kind of interested to delve into that. I don't think we really talk about that enough. But The Marrow Thieves has been on our list for longer. This is a book I originally wanted to read instead of Johnny Appleseed, which I honestly probably would have preferred because I did not like Johnny Appleseed. So for that reason alone, and because yes, like Grace said, we haven't really read enough Indigenous authors in this club, so I will pick The Marrow Thieves. Now this book has been out for quite some time, so it should be readily available to people in your local libraries. But if you do struggle, always feel free to reach out to me in book clubs. I do have a PDF copy that I can share with you if you need that. So yeah, okay. So I was thinking just like every month, last Sunday of the month, which would be September 28th. Does that work for folks, or should we entertain moving the meeting day a little bit?
That works for me.
You said September 28th?
Yes, 28th.
Yeah, that works for me still as well.
I think that's a yes from Arian and Sierra. So good. 28th. And like always, 12 p.m. noon PST, and then whatever time it is for you guys who are not on PST.
Sounds good. I'll be dog sitting that weekend, so that works out for me.
Cool. And I guess on the topic of dogs, Grace, I'm a little bit curious. How are things going with your new puppy?
So Calcite's growing. She's 12 pounds now, and I decided to keep her.
Yay.
So she's my dog now, and she's doing really good, and she's super smart, and she already knows how to sit down, turn around, stay, and paw already. So she's super smart, a very kind little dog, and she's currently sleeping at my feet right now. So if anyone's interested on Discord, I will send you a picture of what the dog looks like because she's also adorable.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Post a photo of her, or it's a girl, right? Her?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Post a photo of her in the miscellaneous channel. I of course want to see.
So yeah, she's sweet, and I'm really glad that I was in the middle of nowhere when someone decided to dump a dog. So she got really lucky, and I did too.
Nice. You sound like one of those people who are like, I didn't save the dog saved me.
No, I definitely saved the dog. So no.
I'm like stuck on this side of TikTok where it's like the cat distribution system. And I don't know if you guys know about that, but
Oh,
I'm like stuck on
100%.
that. I wonder if there's also a version for dogs. There probably is, but it seems like that dog
Yeah.
got you.
Yeah, no, I was like, what the heck? Yeah, because I have a cat that I found the same way. My cat Spooky was a dumpster cat, and I was like, what? It was like a little kitten, and yeah. So apparently that's how I get all my animals is they just show up and go, hello, and I go, hi.
Well, hopefully the same thing does not apply to your partners, because that will be an issue.
It used to be, but not anymore. Thanks, therapy. No.
Okay. Well, definitely post a photo of your cat. I love cats, so I got to see that cat.
Oh, 100%.
And
Spooky.
that's such a great name, Spooky. I love that.
He's an all black kitty, and
Mhm.
he's 17 years old now. I've had him since I was like 15.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's really cute. So yeah, I'll look up some pictures of all my pets. You got it.
Sounds great.
Aw. I have an all black cat too. He's literally sitting right in front of me on my desk, sleeping as we chat. His name is Leo.
Leo.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for all black cats. As soon as I see an all black kitten, like my heart melts. So that's what happened with Spooky for sure.
Nice, nice. When I was a kid, well, not a kid, I wasn't a kid. I was like 17. I had a white cat with like orange spots, and I loved him to pieces, but he would always sleep on my clothes, and then I'm covered in like white cat hair. So I was determined when I get another cat, I'm like, he has to be black. That way, even if he is on my clothes, you don't see it. So I love Leo for that purpose alone. Okay, anyway, I can talk about cats all day, so let me stop. Um, okay, well, I'll put us down for the Marrow Thieves on September 28th at 12 p.m. PST. Hope to see you guys all there. Thank you for Sierra and Benita. I know it's your first meeting. Hopefully you guys enjoy yourselves. Um, but until next month, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And of course, like always, Arian, for you, enjoy the rest of your Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you for hosting.
Thank you so much. It was awesome as usual. Thank you.
Of course.
Bye, guys. Wait,
Yeah, it
before
was
you
nice
go,
meeting
just
y'all.
want to say, like,
See
We're-
y'all.
such an amazing time. So I just want to say, guys, thank you so much. I cannot wait to talk to you guys again.
Yeah, for sure. See you
Real.
next month. And you were so much fun to have.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for the good energy.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye, guys. Have a good weekend. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Bye bye.